Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a highly dramatic historical event to understand how a single catastrophic military mistake actually shaped the entire concept of legal accountability in Islamic civilization. We're going to be analyzing the famous expedition to the Banu Jadheemah tribe, mapping out exactly how these powerful accountability structures were built from the ground up. To start us off, we really have to ask ourselves a pretty profound question about power, military errors, and justice. What actually happens when a military commander breaks the laws of war? Do they just get away with it because of their rank? Are they punished? Or is there a deeper structural way to handle state-level mistakes? That right there is the core of today's analysis. We aren't just looking at a battlefield skirmish. We are looking at the birth of a judicial philosophy. All right, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The expedition, 2. A tragic misunderstanding, and 3. The Prophet's response. Then we'll get into the legal mechanics with 4, understanding valid ijtihad, 5, the Mazalim Court system, and finally 6, Sharia above the state. Okay, part 1, the expedition. Let's set the stage and look at the background of this mission because, context is everything with historical precedents. Notice the timing here. This happened in Shawwal of the year 8H, literally right after the conquest of Makkah. The Prophet Muhammad sent Khalid ibn al-Walid, who, and this is absolutely crucial, was a relatively new Muslim at this time, on a very specific mission. He was sent merely to invite the Banu Jadheemah tribe to Islam. He was strictly instructed not to fight them. But looming in the background is that first point on our timeline, a pre-Islamic blood feud where the Banu Jadheemah had previously killed Khalid's uncle. So Khalid rolls up to the tribe with a unit of exactly 350 men, pulled from various groups including veteran companions from the Muhajirun and the Ansar. Now put yourself in the shoes of the Banu Jadheemah for a second. You see a heavily armed unit of 350 men marching toward you, led by a man whose uncle your tribe killed years ago. Understandably, they panicked and immediately took up their weapons in self-defense. Moving to part 2. A tragic misunderstanding. Let's examine how this incredibly tense standoff turned into a fatal error. Khalid commanded the tribe to drop their weapons, telling them that the Quraysh and others had already embraced Islam, so hostilities were over, but fear was running so high. A tribesman named Jahardur vehemently warned his people with this chilling quote, "By Allah, the only thing that will follow our laying down of our weapons is imprisonment, and the only things that will follow that will be the striking of our necks." He was literally terrified of retaliation. Despite his passionate warnings, though, his tribe just wanted peace and eventually forced Jahardur to lay down his arms. And here is where it all goes wrong. A fatal linguistic mistake. Khalid ordered their hands tied, which was standard procedure for combatants, and then formally invited them to Islam. But they didn't use the standard phrasing. Instead of formally stating Islamna, which means we have embraced Islam, they panicked and used a colloquial phrase saying Sabana, which translates to, we have changed our religion. Now, in the context of that time, enemies often use this as a derogatory term for Muslims. Khalid interpreted this not as a submission, but as a refusal or even a mockery, and based on that, he ordered their execution. What's really fascinating here is that the troops were immediately divided by this command. The soldiers from Banu Sulaym carried out the order, but the Muhajirun and Ansar, veterans like Abdullah ibn Umar, firmly refused. They knew the rules of engagement inside and out, and they recognized that Khalid was making a terrible, unlawful mistake. They completely objected to the order, and most importantly, they reported the event directly back to the Prophet. Which brings us to part 3, the Prophet's response. Let's look at the immediate fallout of this severe breach of conduct. When the Prophet was informed of what happened, the historical sources tell us he became incredibly angry. He raised his hands toward the sky and unequivocally disavowed Khalid's actions, declaring, "O Allah, I do indeed absolve myself of what Khalid did." He made it crystal clear to the state, the military, and the public that this was a severe violation of Islamic law and morality. No cover-ups, no excuses. But, just a verbal disavowal wasn't enough. The state actually had to make it right. To redress these unlawful killings, the Prophet sent Ali ibn Abi Talib as his emissary to pay blood money to the grieving families. And he didn't just pay the bare minimum either. He paid an excess amount to genuinely console them. Plus, when Khalid and another companion got into a heated argument over the event, the Prophet stepped right in with a sharp verbal rebuke. It's a really striking contrast. The emotional tragedy of the battlefield was met with calculated, compensatory, state-driven justice. Part 4. Understanding valid ijtihad. Now, you might be wondering, wait, why wasn't the commander physically punished for this? Let's explore the legal nuance. We really have to understand this term, ijtihad. It basically happens when a qualified individual expends maximum effort to derive the right ruling or action based on the knowledge they have at the time. Khalid, as the appointed leader, was in a position to make a judgment call. He saw armed men, he knew the history of hostility, and he heard a phrase that didn't sound like a proper conversion. He genuinely tried to do what was right based on his limited knowledge of Islamic military law at that specific moment, even though his conclusion was tragically, horrifically wrong. So, because Khalid performed a valid, meaning he actually had the legal authority to make a call, but totally incorrect ijtihad, it wasn't classified as premeditated first-degree murder. Instead, it was ruled as an egregious error in judgment by an official acting in his official capacity. Therefore, under the law, Khalid faced mandatory financial compensation rather than corporal punishment. This right here established a massive legal precedent for exactly how state actors are judged when they make catastrophic errors in the line of duty. All right, part 5, the Mazalim Court system. Let's zoom out now and see how this one incident built a massive structure of state accountability. Look, Islamic political theory acknowledges a fundamental truth. The Islamic State is not pitched as some flawless utopia. People are human, rulers make mistakes, and commanders absolutely overstep. Because of this, the principle of addressing al-Mazalim, which translates to state-level grievances or injustices, was absolutely essential. The state had to have mechanisms to ensure that when the government wronged a citizen, the victim felt they truly received justice and adequate redress. You can actually trace the incredible evolution of this accountability. It started with the foundational principles during the Banu Jadheemah incident in the Prophetic era, where immediate state-sponsored compensation was paid out. By the time of the Abbasid Caliphate, this evolved into a formal institution. And later, during the Seljuk and Mamluk sultanates, the Mazalim courts were so prominent they were housed in massive, standalone buildings known as Dar ul-Adl, or the House of Justice, basically a Supreme Court specifically designed to hold the state itself accountable. Finally, Part 6, Sharia above the state. Let's look at the overarching political theory that makes all these accountability structures possible in the first place. The big takeaway here is this concept of siyada, or sovereignty. In modern nation-states, sovereignty usually rests with the state itself, or the constitution it writes. But in Islamic political thought, sovereignty belongs completely, absolutely, and exclusively to the Sharia alone. Because the Sharia rules over all state institutions, no caliph, no minister, and certainly no military commander possesses absolute sovereignty. Literally everyone is subservient to the law. This famous quote from the Prophet really locks this fundamental principle in. There is no obedience to anyone if it is disobedience to Allah. Verily, obedience is only in good conduct. This means a soldier's obedience to a general or a citizen's obedience to a ruler is never absolute. The very second an authority figure crosses ethical and legal limits, just like Khalid did with the Banu Jadheemah, the obligation to obey immediately vanishes. That is the ultimate check on executive power. So I'm going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to end our explainer today. We've just seen how a single, devastating battlefield mistake led to a robust system of state accountability and Supreme Courts dedicated to getting justice against the state itself. So if this level of structural accountability, transparency, and strict adherence to the rule of law existed over 1,000 years ago, what on earth is stopping us from demanding the exact same level of accountability from our global leaders and institutions today? Thanks for exploring this with me, and keep questioning the structures of power around you.